at you. Good morning, everybody. A rare appearance this morning. Former President George Bush returns to the spotlight, set to deliver a speech on the growing crisis on North Korea. That's a threat he's quite familiar with after 8 years in office. Good morning, everybody. Big morning here on Bill Hemmer, live in America's Newsroom as we get rolling right now. Sandra, good morning.
Good morning to you, Bill. I'm Sandra Smith. Former President Bush set to speak in about 2 hours. Former First Lady Laura Bush set to kick off the events in just moments.
So President Bush is joined by plenty of big names, including current UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. She will be there. Former Secretaries of State Condoleezza Rice and Madeleine Albright and Eric Shawn live at that event here in New York City for what we are expecting to hear from the former president this morning. Eric, start us off.
Do I still have IFB?
We got you, Eric. If you got me, Eric, I've got you. Go ahead.
Can you ask the...
Okay, our apologies here. Hang on just a moment here. If we get this established here, we'll get back to Eric Shawn and get a preview for what the president's going to say. Remember the axis of evil on the floor of the House? It was Iran, it was Iraq, it was North Korea. That was then, and this is today, where the North Korean threat continues to befuddle so many around the world. So back to Eric Shawn when we get him live here in a couple moments here. In the meantime, Sandra, another very busy week for President Trump.
It is indeed. We are in the middle of a very busy week. Today, the Senate gearing up for another important vote, this one on budget legislation, taking what the president is calling the first step. But it's not without a few hurdles. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live on the North Lawn. Good morning, John.
Sandra, good morning to you. The president keeping a close eye on the moves in the Senate today. Vote on a budget resolution that will lay the groundwork to pass tax reform with a simple majority. Yesterday, the president spent time with members of a bipartisan group from the Senate Finance Committee. That is the committee in the Senate that will be writing the tax reform legislation. The president insisting that a combination of corporate tax cuts from 35% down to 20%, plus the repatriation of what might be, according to the president, as much as $3.5 trillion being held by companies overseas will result in a substantial increase in household income for the average American family of about $4,000 a year. Listen to what the president said yesterday.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, in my opinion. This is something that will be really unique. The timing is right. I have had people on both sides, and I promise not to mention the name of the people on the other sides or names, but a lot of people are liking this very much, and I think we'll have tremendous support.
And the president tweeting about this afternoon's vote in the Senate, quote, Republicans are going for the big budget approval today. First step toward massive tax cuts. I think we have the votes, but who knows? The president suggesting he does have support from Democrats, but the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, doing his best yesterday to muster Democratic opposition to a bill he says will cut entitlements and blow a huge hole in the deficit. Here's Schumer.
Do you want to cut Medicaid or not? Yes or no? Do you want to cut Medicare or not? Yes or no? Do you want to vote for a $1.5 trillion deficit? Do you want 80% of the tax cuts to go to the top 1% to the very wealthy, while middle-class taxes are raised for many people? Yes or no?
It's unclear, Sandra, in the president's tweet what he said. Will we have the votes? I don't know. We'll see if he was referring to this afternoon's budget measure, if he was referring to the overall tax reform legislation he hopes to get passed by the end of the year. But it does look like Republicans have got the votes to pass the budget measure this afternoon. John McCain, who was one of the people sitting on the fence, came out yesterday and said that he will vote for that budget measure this afternoon.
A busy day, a busy week indeed. John, yesterday, for anybody who was watching that White House press briefing, the news was clearly dominated by the president's call to the wife of a soldier killed in action. We saw a lot of questions.
Yeah, and as a person myself who does a lot of work with an organization that gives services to military families who have lost a loved one, I mean, it really kind of was a sad day for so many people who deal with families like that. A condolence call became highly politicized after a congresswoman in Florida said that she was listening in on a condolence call that the president made to Maisha Johnson. She is the widow of Sergeant LaDavid T. Johnson. And this Florida congresswoman, who you see on the screen right there, said that the president was insensitive in that call. She got some backup from Johnson's mother, by the way. But the president yesterday, as he was meeting with the Finance Committee, insists that what she says did not happen. Listen here.
Didn't say what that congresswoman said. Didn't say it at all. She knows it. Had a very nice conversation with the woman, with the wife, who sounded like a lovely woman. Did not say what the congresswoman said, and most people aren't too surprised to hear that.
The press secretary yesterday said his son to combat in Afghanistan in 2010 was also on the call and thought that what the president said to the widow was totally appropriate. And she ripped the congresswoman for trying to politicize the whole event. Listen here.
This was a president who loves our country very much, who has the greatest level of respect for men and women in the uniform, and wanted to call and offer condolences to the family. And I think to try to create something from that the Congresswoman is doing is frankly appalling and disgusting.
Sanders expanded on that, saying that the chief of staff, Kelly, frankly thought that it was disgusting that someone would try to politicize a condolence call like that. Johnson, by the way, was one of 4 Green Berets who was killed in an ISIS ambush in the country of Niger in Africa a little more than a couple of weeks ago. Sandra?
Sean Roberts, thank you.
I want to bring in Charlie Hurt right now, a bit of analysis on this. Opinion editor of Washington Times and Fox News contributor. Charlie, how you doing? Good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Bill.
How do you see this back and forth playing out in such
it's
apparent and national way?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very awkward to watch, and it's uncomfortable to watch, and clearly it's a distraction and one that the president somewhat brought on himself by wandering into that business about these condolence calls made by his predecessors. It's one of those things where, if you're somebody like me, I want to see the guy succeed. You wish you could have like a remote control, and when he starts wandering into something like this, you could just mute him real quick so that he just stops talking about it. And so, these condolence calls, it's always an incredibly difficult situation. The people on the receiving.
You could just imagine, right? I mean, this is one of the toughest phone calls a president makes. Letters someone has to write. Sarah Sanders said the president was completely respectful, very sympathetic. And I tell you what, Charlie, what Marcus Luttrell said about 30 minutes ago, he of Afghanistan, lone survivor, he said, there is nothing we can do, there is nothing we can say that is the equivalent of the sacrifice these families have made for this country.
Yeah, and to think about the people on the receiving end of that call, it's harder on no one than it is on them. And maybe they voted for this president, maybe they didn't. They're still in this phone call with this president, and it's got to be so incredibly difficult. And I do think it's sort of interesting that what doesn't get politicized is these calls where a politician isn't present. And when you have a politician, you have this congressperson in the car with the widow, and it suddenly becomes politicized. And I think it's, people are so sick and tired of this stuff. I think that, obviously Donald Trump, maybe even if he did say something that was offensive or didn't strike the right chord, he certainly didn't mean to. And it's clear what he was trying to say. He was talking about the bravery of this young man, going into knowing full well what he was getting into, and to turn it in and make it into something political is just, it's the ickiest thing there is.
That bravery is enormous, too, and we salute all of them. Charlie, thank you, sir. Nice to have you back on our program. Charlie Hurd there in D.C. Nice. 9 minutes past. Sandra.
We're going to go back to New York City now, where President George W. Bush is getting ready to give a big speech on North Korea. We got cut off earlier with Eric Shawn. Let's go back to him with what we are expecting to hear from former President Bush this morning. Good morning again to you, Eric.
Good morning, Sandra. Democracy, freedom, and human rights are what we expect to hear from former President George W. Bush here this morning. And as you said, it is a rare public appearance by the former commander-in-chief on public policy. Let's take a look inside live at the event. Former First Lady Laura Bush expected momentarily to start kicking it off. It is called The Spirit of Liberty at Home in the World, intended as a sharp counterpoint to the dictators and despots, especially North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. I'm told that the North Korean issue and crisis is very close to the former president's heart. His foundation and institute is helping North Korean escapees and the activists fight the regime. The Bush Institute runs the North Korean Freedom Scholarship Program and has awarded $25,000 in scholarships to 8 young escapees to study in universities in our country. One of them is Montgomery College student Grace Joe. She's 26 years old and told us when she was growing up in North Korea, she was taught it was mandatory to bow before the portrait of the North Korean leader.
During New Year's time, New Year's Day, the government will give us little kids a gift bag, which is cookies and candies in a bag, and then we hold that bag in front of us and then bow to the portrait for 3 times.
Grace is one of several North Korean escapees who will meet with the former president here this morning. She has a remarkable story of a desperate existence. She told us her 2 brothers starved to death. Her father was tortured by police for sneaking in a bag of rice. And for 10 days at one point, the family only survived on water. They had no food. So her mother found 6 baby mice in the field, and her grandmother had to make soup out of the mice just for the family to survive. She says the regime only understands tough talk and is blunt about what she thinks should be the fate of Kim Jong-un.
The North Korean regime should not exist in this world any longer. I will say the U.S. government use military force or any kind of force. We should stop the North Korean regime because the regime is killing those innocent people in the country. And child, babies, and moms and elders, they're dying without any hope.
Well, Grace told us she does not want a war or to bomb North Korea. She hopes that covert actions could help topple the regime. Sandra, back to you.
Eric Shawn live for us in New York City. Thank you.
Interesting to see him today, Sandra. President Trump, meanwhile, giving mixed messages on the Senate plan on Obamacare. So where does he stand today? Wisconsin Republican Sean Duffy takes that on next live. Plus, there is this.
First it was, I did not have communications with Russians, which was not true. Then it was, I never met with any Russians.
I conducted no improper discussions with Russians at any time.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions clashing repeatedly with Democratic senators at a hearing yesterday. Sessions calling out Democrats for pushing a false agenda on the Russian narrative. More of the biggest headlines in just a moment.
Also, what is the truth behind a uranium deal and Russia under the Obama team that intersects with the Clinton Foundation? A new investigation underway. Details on that in a moment. Sandra?
And on the run, no more. A multi-state manhunt for a suspected killer ends with the suspect in custody.
Here it is again, another event, another tragedy. And, you know, when everything's over.
Mixed messages on a bipartisan deal from the Senate to temporarily shore up the insurance markets today when he said the following.
Has the White House been involved in those negotiations, and will you support that deal?
Yes, we have been involved, and this is a short-term deal because we think ultimately block grants going to the states is going to be the answer. That's a very good solution. While I commend the bipartisan work done by Senators Alexander and Murray, and I do commend it, I continue to believe Congress must find a solution to the Obamacare mess instead of providing bailouts to insurance companies. If something can happen, that's fine, but I won't do anything to enrich the insurance companies.
So there was a sampling from the last couple of days. Wisconsin Republican Sean Duffy, member of the House Financial Services Committee back home in Wisconsin. Sir, good morning to you. You heard it.
Good morning to you, Bill.
I know you know what's going on, so what's up?
So I think the president's pretty clear here. He understands that he, as the executive, doesn't have the power to unilaterally spend money. We learned this in middle school when we do our studies, that we have separations of power. Legislative fix to Obamacare, and money is supposed to flow to the exchanges. It's going to have to come through the Congress. And so the president has tipped his hand to this bipartisan working group in the Senate. But I think we need to make sure, Bill, that we get some substantial reforms. We got to get rid of the employer mandate, the individual mandate. We have to give more power to our states to run health care plans that fit the people that belong to each of those states. And if you don't, and this is just a bailout to Obamacare, one, many of us in the House won't vote for it, but I think the American people who have decimated Democrats at the ballot box will be upset as well. They want a new health care system that's going to work, and to bail out the current system, I don't think will sit well with the American people.
And this is part of the negotiation process. This tweet from yesterday: I am supportive of Lamar Alexander as a person, the president writes, and also the process, but I can never support bailing out insurance companies who have made a fortune with Obamacare. That seems to be where he is solidifying his position. He doesn't want to bail out the insurance companies. Does that bipartisan bill that was floated, does that have the support of the House? Would that pass?
Well, Well, we don't know what it's going to look like yet. I mean, they're working on a bipartisan package, but we all have to analyze it and see what kind of reform we get to Obamacare. So it's too early to tell that right now, Bill. But I think what the president should do here is what he did like with DACA, with the Dreamers. He should set a drop-dead date. Maybe he can extend it to January or February and say, if you guys don't have a fix by this date, these payments to insurance companies are going to go away. I don't have the power to extend them. You and the Congress have to fix this.
Put a deadline
and it puts
on
pressure
it.
on members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to fix it.
Quickly, Steve Mnuchin, you know the Dow hit 23,000. Have you heard? Steve Mnuchin said this: to the extent we get the tax deal done, the don't get it done, you're going to see a reversal of a significant amount of these gains. That could be trillions of dollars, sir. Do the members of the House talk about that? The urgency to get a tax deal, otherwise perhaps his prediction comes true?
Well, we don't tie it to where the stock market is today. I think to try to predict where the market's going to go is a fool's errand. But we do look at tax reform and how do we grow our economy? How do we make American businesses more competitive? How do we make...
Engineer Stephen Shook from the Mandalay Bay told their story in part this way.
They were gunshots, but you thought it was just drilling sounds.
At first, I think it was just drilling sounds.
Right. So then at what point did you get shot? What happens here?
As that door's closing and it's so heavy, it'll slam. I'm walking down this way, and I believe that's what caught the shooter's attention. As I was walking down, I heard rapid fire, and at first I took cover. I felt a burning sensation. I went to go lift my pant leg up, and I saw the blood.
He shot through this door, right?
Yeah, from behind the door. I didn't know how he was shooting, but he shot out.
Well, when Campos was describing what happened, he did not go into detail about when, and that timeline is critical too. Remember, at the beginning, there was this difference between what the hotel was saying and what the police.
There was a female that came out, and I told her to go back inside. It wasn't safe. Shortly after, that's when Steven was approaching.
It wasn't in the hallway yet, and that's when Jesus, he leaned out and he said, take cover, and yelled at me, and within milliseconds, if he didn't say that, I would have got hit.
They saved a lot of lives. And you can tell clearly just from their disposition, the way they were talking and recalling this, that they were still quite shaken by
Visibly shaken there and very emotional, but still, we thought we would learn more there about the timeline of events. So
I think you're right about that. I mean, these are critical questions that have not yet been answered. Why, we do not know. But last week, when he was scheduled to do all these national interviews, in the last moment, he was pulled. A lot of people were running off some crazy theories, and
there he popped up.
There he popped up and delivered his story the way he did. And look, for the people who were 32 floors below, none of this talk matters.
Yeah.
You know, for the ones who survived, that is what matters to them. So more answers coming on this in time, probably.
All right. Well, the Taliban claiming responsibility for a deadly assault at an Afghan army base. The attack in southern Kandahar province killed at least 43 Afghan soldiers. Senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is following this story for us from London. Greg?
Hi, Sandra. Yeah, we're tracking yet another serious attack by the Taliban in Afghanistan. It happened today, and it possibly involves some U.S. firepower. This is just one of several assaults across the country by rebel fighters in recent days. This one happened at an Afghan military base in the southern province of Kandahar. That's a place where we have been, where Americans have fought, where they're still playing a role. A Taliban suicide bomber in a seized Humvee burst through the gates, detonated his explosives. There was more fighting, another bomber, and then all of the casualties. Now, the U.S. military says that there was an airstrike in the region. Won't be specific whether it was, in fact, targeting the Taliban in this location. The past several days, again, have seen multiple attacks across Afghanistan. Military and police are the targets. Casualties last year were 35% up from the year before, and casualties this year, Sandra, are running ahead of last year. Remember that we have ended our formal combat role in Afghanistan, but there's still 11,000 U.S. troops there. And according to President Trump earlier this year, the U.S. will stay the course. A tricky course indeed. Back to you.
Indeed. Greg Palcott, live for us in London. Thank you.
We are just a tick away from the opening bell on Wall Street. The Dow's in record territory. How about that? We look back on what largest single-day decline in Dow history. We've come a long way since then, and we'll have a look.
Been interviewed or been requested to be interviewed by the special counsel?
No.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions getting a little heated.
Transportation development.